Hey, welcome again to Cultural Anthropology. Today we're going to move to that next layer of culture and talk about social structures, and particularly we'll be focusing on how society organizes itself around the issue of inequality and how it perceives people and things as being unequal. First, let's go back through the original diagram we started off the course with. We talked about worldview and belief, the core issues of culture, what people believe and how they perceive the world, including the things that we've talked about: time, space, power, knowledge, existence, and then things like spirituality and human rights all come out of how we perceive the world. Now, note the issue of inequality that we're talking about. One of these issues here on this slide behind my head is human rights. Human rights is a worldview issue because it is couched in how people perceive other people as human or non-human. Almost every language around the world, the word for people is the same as the word for their culture or their ethnicity, and everything else is excluded as non-people, as something other than us. And so there's a very strong perspective that causes the issue of human rights to come out in the worldview, not just in the value structure, beliefs, and behavior systems. It begins here and then moves up the perceptions of what is good, valuable, conformity, and solidarity. Now we begin to talk about things like justice and mercy, which involve how we deal with inequality. How we deal with inequality at a values level is tied to how we perceive inequality at a belief level. Here we are now at the systems level, which informs our behavior. Why do we do the things that we do? Why do we act the way we act? It's because the systems that we're a part of have informed us how to act. We've been educated, we've been raised by families. All of those structures that make up our society have taught us what to do. A lot of our behaviors are not necessarily the choices of us as individuals so much as they are the acting out of our norms according to the structures that we belong to. And that's where the issue of inequality comes at the system level. This includes things like kinship, government, education, production, commerce, communication, technology, religion, courtship, and friendship. All of those deal with the issue of inequality. How do we perceive other people at the worldview level? How do we value other people at the values level? And therefore, how do we organize people and structure our culture to perceive people at the systems level? That's how we deal with inequality. As humans, we're thinking creatures. And the very process of thinking gives us the desire to organize our thoughts. And so this becomes a major industry in the world today. You can Google how to organize your thoughts and come up with various offers and gimmicks, 5 ways, 3 ways, 6 ways to do it, like organizing your thoughts in the shower. We love to organize our thoughts and we're driven to do so. It's who we are as people. And again, that's everywhere in the world. As soon as you have these thoughts, you feel the need to bring them into some sort of order. When we talk about beliefs and values, we organize those things and make lists, and those lists include sub-lists, right? And that's our operation. We create categories of objects based on how things relate to each other. So we have categories of movies and categories of books and categories of items in a budget and categories of food. All of those things are our attempt to make sense of the world around us by organizing our thinking about them. Of course, in different cultures around the world, then those thoughts are organized in different types of lists. Here's a grouping of items that we would call farm animals. So behind me is a turkey, and then the others are pig, chicken, duck, even cat and dog would be farm animals. If I said to you which of these are food animals, we would exclude several of them as soon as we talked about food. We would take the cat and the dog out for sure, and the rat and the horse and the donkey. We would leave the duck and goose in. We would leave the sheep and cow and the rabbit and the chicken and the goat and the ram, the pig and the rooster and the turkey. We would leave those in the category of food. Now, all of us have a preference on that, right? So when you list your categories of food, you probably would list it in preferential order. So when I say what animals are good for meat, you might say, well, I love beef the best. So we're going to put that at the top of my list. And then I'm going to put pork next and then chicken next. We all have our preferences and organize our preferences accordingly. If you said to a strict Muslim, what do you count as food? They would probably exclude the rabbit. They would exclude the pig. They might keep the horse, though, and they would add camel, maybe in certain parts of the world. So there is a different perspective on what is available for food and what is in the category of food. Every culture has its own listing of categories. Each culture comes up with what's important to them and lists things as important to them, and then lists those things in the order of importance. Some cultures might actually permit all of these food. The point I'm making here is that there are many different ways to organize the same group of objects. Another example would be in terms of color. We organize colors in America, in Western culture, a long list of available colors to us. Starts with a mix of yellow, cyan, and magenta. Then we figure out from yellow, cyan, and magenta what combinations make what colors. And it's all just ratios at that point. It's all mathematically governed. But you go to a paint store and there's hundreds of colors of paint you can choose from. And there'll be a huge wall of paint colors. And you can stand and look at them and try to figure out, you can actually take some home and test them out. Those are all categories of colors. But not every culture divides colors that way and thinks of them and tries to come up with a name for every distinct shade as we do. Go to a paint store sometime, look at the names they came up with for some of the colors. They're sometimes quite funny. So you think about all that way of organizing colors, but other people would group colors in terms of how they relate to each other differently. In my culture in the Philippines, the words for colors like green and blue were not original words. They actually added colors to their language when the Spanish came in and adopted those words. Some cultures perceive blue and green as the same color because they're both blue. We organize things differently. Now, when it comes to a category like people, and that's what we're talking about here, we organize our culture, our world, by categorizing people. We have a lot of different ways to categorize people. Think about that for a minute. How do we categorize people? What groups might you see here? What categories of people might you see in this group? Just look at it for a minute and think about that. The initial categories you probably thought of are in terms of racial categories. We might see Black people, brown people, white people. We see people that we might identify from this picture as Hispanic. We might see people that we would identify as old or young. We might actually look at some and say, well, there's a fringe group there, just by the way they wear their hair. There's something about it that says this, or some sort of other article that you might see in this image. There are just different ways we would categorize those people. We also use categories like shy and bold, introverted and extroverted. If we were able to interact with them for a while, we would begin putting them in those mental categories. Oh, she's one of the shy ones. He's one of the athletic ones. He's really smart. We might even categorize according to our perceptions of beauty and the values that we have in our culture. What is beautiful? And is this person a beautiful person to us? And a whole lot of different ways in which we choose to categorize people. Even within a single racial group, there is an incredible amount of diversity in people, though. And so if you say these are Africans or African Americans, in this case, this is an image of Africans. If you say this is what Africans are like, or you group a whole large group of people together and call them Africans, what you're failing to understand is the incredible diversity of Africa. Africa is not just one country. That perception is one of the jokes in Africa, and different countries in Africa, they'll make that joke that Americans think we're just one country with a bunch of states, but no, each country is unique. The peoples are unique. Ethnically, the peoples are unique. They're not from the same tribal or language group, and they don't have the same culture. So you can't go to West Africa, to say Ghana, and then move to Kenya and expect the people to act the same just because they're African. They will act very different. They will have very different customs, practices, and beliefs that will make them distinct from each other. And even within a group of Africans like this, look at the faces, and you can see that facial features and body size and bone structure differ. There's a lot of differences across Africa in what the people are physically like. You might be tempted to think of them all as one group. That's what we tend to do. The same is true when we say the word Hispanic. To create a monolithic group of one people that all act the same is to misunderstand them as people. They don't all act the same. And there's cultural similarities between people from one Hispanic culture and another, but there are very distinct cultural differences, and they also see themselves as different. There's often these categories that every culture creates in the we, they perception. We're not them. We're different than them. They're something else. We are the people. They are not. And that's why I say ethnocentrism is not just a white problem. Ethnocentrism exists across all cultures. In much of Asia, whiter skin is considered a sign of wealth. It's a sign of power and prestige. This is a famous Indian actress and model. And so she is positioned there with beautifully whitened skin, seen as very beautiful as a result of that. And she's wealthy and powerful and prestigious within her culture. And then these are people from the mountains of India on the left who are farmers and note how dark their skin is. And so what often the case is, as it was the case where I was in the Philippines, the darker a person's skin is, the more likely it is that they're poor. That was a perception. Why? Because they have to be out in the sun. Wealthy people don't go out in the sun. They try to keep their skin as white as possible. It's very common in Asia to go into a store to buy beauty products for women, and find that all of them have some sort of skin bleach, skin whitener in the product, even underarm deodorant. It's seen as a way of perceiving categories of people that darker means poor labor and whiter means richer upper class. If a man in Asia has naturally darker skin and wants to prove that he is from a wealthier class, he'll often grow out his fingernail. You'll see bankers and businessmen with this one long fingernail. The reason for it is to prove that they don't get their hands dirty. They don't work in the field. They aren't mechanics. They're business people, and they can afford to keep a good manicure. Women do the same all over the world to show a bit of status. If you don't have long, beautiful painted nails, you probably are some sort of a menial laborer and can't keep them that way. That's less so in our society than it used to be. So just by something like skin color or fingernail, we begin to categorize people and think of them as unequal to ourselves. And that's the point of this lesson. We're looking at inequality. The issue of inequality then leads to a couple of natural results. And just to use this as an example, I want to be clear on this. It isn't the only result of the way we categorize and perceive inequality, but it certainly is a big one, and it's a big one in America. That's the issue of racism. Because of the way we categorize, we make certain groupings of people. And as soon as you start grouping people, you start ranking people. You begin to think of some of them as more important than others. I'm saying that as a natural human tendency, and that's the reason for this lesson, for you to see that when you go to other cultures, they do it too. They categorize and rank, and we categorize and rank. Usually we rank preference according to our own culture and then other cultures after. And we rank preference according to how we perceive other cultures as similar or different than ours. If you think about our relationship with the world, we prioritize other Western cultures over other, say, African cultures or Asian cultures. Our relationship is stronger with certain ones, likely due to a ranking that puts them as more like us. So we would rank the democracies closer to us than kingdoms. One of those rankings is the way we treat other people based on the simple issue of the color of our skin. And as I mentioned in the introduction lesson, as we're talking about race versus ethnicity. Race is actually a category of identification that comes because it's an easy category for us because perceptually we see that people look different than we do. And we use that as a strong category, when in fact, according to the genetic code that we all share as human beings, it's a very small factor. And just to show that, here's an image, and you'll see three men here. These are scientists, researchers who work together, and we're exploring genetics. They compared their own genetic codes with each other. These color bars signify something called alleles, and I'm not a geneticist, so that's about as far as I'm going to go. That's part of the code which distinguishes us from each other. You have different markers within your genetic code that make you look like you do, give you the distinct biological features that you have. So those distinct biological markers, 92.7%, I think it is, are shared by all people all over the world. We all have 92% of the same markers. It's those last 8% of the markers that give us our hair color, eye color, and our height, and our disposition towards certain weight, our body size, our body build, body shape, our voice, whether we have a high voice or a deep voice. All of those are the things that make us different. One of the things that this graph on the right shows is that Watson and Ventnor only shared one additional strong marker, one allele, that Kim, who was South Korean, did not have. But Kim and Watson and Kim and Ventnor both shared two markers that are alleles that were similar. And so Kim is more genetically like Watson than Ventnor is like Watson. There's a larger genetic difference between Watson and Ventnor than there is between Watson and Kim or Ventnor and Kim. We can look at skin color as a major differentiation between people, but genetically, it is not a major differentiation. It is not a major difference between us. We're a lot more like each other. If you stop and think about it, you can sort a group. If we were in a classroom right now, I might have all of you stand up, and then I would have you sort yourselves by height. We have quite a variation in height. We make that as a distinction. We pay attention to that, but we don't treat it the same way we treat skin color. But genetically, it's the same kind of difference. That genetically, some people are taller and some people are shorter. Genetically, some people are whiter and some people are darker. Don't give the same significance to height as we do to color. That is why racism becomes a major issue. As a result of this, anthropologists are making a bit of a change now. And if you look at this, which more accurately describes our identity? Our race and physical attributes, or ancestry and ethnicity? Today, anthropologists are talking less about race and more about ethnicity or ancestry, and specifically ancestry. Where did you come from? What is in your ancestry? That's a more important factor, a more important identifier. And especially when we look at cultures, ethnicity or family history is a greater predictor of cultural differences than race is. The family that you come from and the history that family has and where you are today, actually. So you're looking at ancestry, but you're also looking at the way that ancestry has come about in your life today. Especially as the world is moving towards a lot more mingling of cultures, a lot more interracial or interethnic marriages taking place today. What we're seeing is that mingling of cultures in many parts of the world, especially in cities around the world, is creating new cultures, a mingling of cultural values. And we're seeing that in our own nation today. When we look at people groups around the world and we're trying to identify what makes them similar, what makes them like, start with what is their people group? Who are they as a family and as a people? Likely you'll find within an ethnic group a strong orientation towards a specific set of cultural beliefs, values, systems, and behaviors which make up that people group. Taking Africa as a case in point, you cannot look at a tribal people in Ghana and a tribal people in Kenya and see them as a single group. They might look similar. They might have some cultural similarities because there's a lot more about us that's similar than theirs that is different. And so within that people group, they will also have a way of ranking and identifying their relationship with the other people groups. That's what makes them distinct as a culture, the way they organize their thinking at a structural level. So again, coming back to this drawing, when we create categories, we rank those categories. When those categories pertain to humans, we end up giving preferential treatment to those groups that we rank higher. Every culture does this. We rank by color, we rank by ethnicity. A few weeks ago, we talked about status and role, and we rank by status. We rank by the role that those statuses play. We rank by wealth, by prestige, by competency and skill. And we rank athletes according to their skill. All sorts of different things that we use to rank people and to describe inequalities that exist. You can say that there's a dispositional attribute. It's where we attribute a person's behavior to their internal characteristics, including things like ethnicity, personality, birth, identity. And then we would say that their behavior is caused by those circumstances. They do things the way they do them because they are those people, because they have that ethnicity. So, you can say that Elsa turns things to ice because she is Arendelle. And therefore, you can jump to a conclusion that all Arendelle turn things to ice, which would not be true. But if you have an encounter with an Arendelle and that encounter leads you to believe certain things about that person, it may lead you to believe certain things about all the people. And now you're making a dispositional attribution. You're saying because they were born in this family, because they have these characteristics, mostly characteristics like hair color and skin color and birth order and other things like that, that we actually don't have any control over. We didn't choose who we are. We have these things that are just who we are. They make our identity. But then people begin to attribute behavior to people like that. Comedians today often have a lot of jokes about the differences between men and women. They kind of lump all men or all women into a certain disposition. Well, they do that because they're men. That's the way men do things. That's what men do. And that's what women do. We tend to lump people into categories that attribute to that category certain features based on our knowledge of people within that category. And if that knowledge of people within that category has had a bad situation, a negative feeling for us, then we're likely to attribute more bad to that group of people based on our interaction with one or two people from that group of people who were bad. And that's where we begin to make these huge statements that would be ethnocentric or racist statements. On the other side is the situational attribution, where we look at the situation of the person and say, what is it that causes her to do the things that she does? We might look at it as woundedness and upbringing and environmental factors and personality factors. In her case, she had these powers and she doesn't know how to control them. And because she hasn't learned how to control the powers, then they combine with her pain, and you know the story if you watch the movie, right? So what we need to be careful about is looking at the people that we're engaging with when we go into another culture, looking at them as individuals who are shaped by their culture. They don't act the way they do because they're from that ethnicity. They act that way because that ethnicity has formed a culture with certain structures which have informed them how to act, and they're acting out of the norms of their culture. And that's what you're trying to figure out. You're not trying to lump them all together into one monolithic idea of what these people are like. You're trying to figure out how the people you're trying to talk to and reach, how are they shaped? What shaped their lives? I think we see that in our own identity in North America. We're probably pretty aware of that. But in other cultures, we tend to forget that. I don't want to be considered as monolithic as the same as everybody in my culture. And yet I'll go to another culture and act like everybody in that culture is all the same. So here's another example of that. Looking at the way we handle this is that when we're talking about others, we tend to group them. This is broken because one-eyed monsters break things. That's what they do. Like I don't trust one-eyed monsters because they're careless or whatever. We start lumping a group of people in based on what we perceive of their actions, often because of the actions of a few. On the other hand, when we talk about ourselves, we don't give the same attribution. We actually look for a causation that is outside of ourselves as much as possible. We justify ourselves if we can. If I break the cup, I'll say, I dropped it because you put it too close to the edge. It's your fault, not my fault. Or it was circumstantial. Even if I'm not blaming somebody else, it was too close to the edge. It shouldn't have been there. I don't know why somebody left it there. We blame somebody instead of blaming ourselves. The same will be true when we go into another culture. We see ourselves as a product of our situations. We see others as the product of their culture. And that's a dangerous thing that we need to learn to get past in order to be able to reach people with the gospel and understand that they are individuals within a structural system that has informed them how to act. We also are individuals within a structural system that has informed us how to act. Now, I want to take that into what happens when within a society we begin to rank people and we begin to make attributions. What we end up doing is creating a system where systemically those people are treated as unequal. And when we do that, it creates inequality in other areas. And we would say that different groups therefore end up with greater or lesser cultural capital as a result of the way they're treated within their own nation or within their own society. If somebody is given a higher status within the ranking of people within the culture, no matter what that is, we're not just talking about racism here, we're talking about socioeconomic status, the wealthy, the talented, whatever it is that we used to rank, and we say these people have greater value than others, then we give them cultural capital, and that cultural capital gives them opportunities. Those who are not categorized in that same level of society have less cultural capital. Cultural capital gives you the opportunity to do things and to move within your culture more freely than other people would have. So people aren't necessarily poor because of their ethnicity or the color of their skin. People are poor because society has given them fewer advantages or they've been discriminated against by society. Every society does this. That is what we would look at as a systemic problem. There's a problem within the system of culture, the system at that third layer of our culture that is shaped by values and beliefs. Therefore, the systems are built on those beliefs and values. In America, we highly value celebrity. And because somebody acts in a movie we enjoy, we are willing to accord them a status within our society that gives them sometimes incredible wealth and power. All of a sudden, we're listening to the words that somebody says because they're a famous actor. The same with athletes. We have certain athletes that we put high on a pedestal, when in fact, those are ordinary people who have the same structural problems that we do. Sometimes they're not actually wiser than us, but we will listen to their tweet before we listen to our best friend's advice. We get advice from these celebrities. We follow them on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or whatever. That's given rise to a celebrity status of people who just make stupid videos. And all of a sudden, we can't wait for the next thing. And we allow ourselves to be shaped by the advice of these people. Why? Because they have something more important to say than my best friend has to say? Or because they have cultural capital, which gives them opportunity to speak on a platform with a louder voice than other people have. And that's really what we face. Cultural capital works in a lot of different ways. When you get cultural capital, you get listened to, you get heard. Those without cultural capital don't always get heard. You as students rank your professors. You'll take the advice of Professor Harvard over Professor Hartford. Why? Because you categorize and rank your professors. And once you rank your professors, then you create a sense of value in what they say as being more important than what the others say. And that may or may not be true. Not everything I say is true. I try to research what I do, but I may misunderstand things. I simply don't understand everything. I have my perspectives on life, and you may not agree with some things in this lesson. That's fine. I'm okay with that because it's not my status that should inform you. It's as you study for yourself and learn for yourself that helps you to grow and understand the world around you. But certainly society, cultural capital is a significant issue. And so if people are discriminated against in our society because of the color of their skin, which they are, and that informs the system of our culture to treat those people differently. And the system, therefore, doesn't give them the same opportunity that a person with a different color of skin would have. And that is what we call systemic racism. It's not just systemic racism, it's a systemic issue. So I think sometimes we get caught up in the emotions of arguments online, and the word systemic racism becomes, oh no, we're all going to go woke now, or something like that. We get alarmed by those things. When in fact, every culture has systemic issues that are tainted and stained by the sin that so much surrounds all of what we do. And our attitudes towards one another create these systems. And then once the system is created, it becomes a powerful force in shaping who we are as people and shaping our behavior and shaping our actions and attitudes. So don't be afraid of that concept of systemic racism. It's a real thing that exists in so many different ways. And this is actually, I found this diagram off of a church website. They were talking about how they were approaching things. This idea that I think is really helpful. You start with this lower level, internalized race-based beliefs and feelings within individuals. So if there's an issue of racism in my life, I have to start by looking at the internal. What have I internalized? What do I believe and how do I feel? I challenge myself. Now, I may come to a place in my life where I feel like I don't have racism at the internal level. I have confronted what there is in my life that I know of, I'm aware of. I no longer internalize those beliefs. I've rejected those internalized beliefs. I believe that all people are equal. I'm going to begin to act now out of that. At the interpersonal level, there's bigotry and biases shown between individuals through word and action. So that's another kind of racism. We're into name calling and showing by attitude and action that we're bigoted towards one another. That can come from the internal, but also can come from systemic. And then at the next level, that institutional, discriminatory policies and practices within organizations and institutions. We need to challenge our institutions. Are our institutions creating inequality between peoples by the way the institution is structured? This would be looking at salary levels. Are people paid the same for the same job, or are people of different ethnicities paid differently? If people with different ethnicities are paid by the same organization differently, in spite of their capacity, skill, and education, in spite of everything else, then there's an institutional racism taking place or an institutional ethnocentrism taking place, not just racism again. This goes beyond that. And then at the outer level here, it's systemic racism or the ongoing racial inequalities that are maintained by society. And the problem with that is that systemic racism is kind of like a toy you wound up and let go. You created it, you decided to make it a certain way, you wound it up and you put mechanisms into it, and then you let it go and it does what it's going to do. Systems get like that. Systems get a life of their own. Because they work that way, then people begin to just follow the system. And when people follow the system, they may move to interpersonal racism or even internalized racism, and they do it unquestioningly. I would say at the systematic level, we should always be questioning. Society tells us these are the systems. This is the way education works, for instance. Well, why does education work that way? Is it the best way to educate people, or is it just the way we educate people? Are there other ways we could educate people? Are there things we could differently? Could we challenge some of the educational system? Jesus challenged the religious system of the Jewish people. He showed that they had taken the word of God and the law of God and systematized it in such a way that treated people unfairly and didn't actually give glory to God the way they thought they were giving glory to God. And so he challenged many things about the Jewish system in his teaching. Now he's coming up against systematized religion, a religion that's not just an institutional thing here, it's a systematized thing. It's not just the way a synagogue operates, it's the way the Jewish religion operated. And he challenges that. Martin Luther challenged the systemic problems within Catholicism, within the Church of Europe. And so as he challenged the system, one of the things that resulted from that is what we actually call systematic theology. And in a way, it replaced the system with the system. Sometimes systematic theologies get problematic because they hold on to a system of belief rather than trust in God as the foundation. You're operating more out of, well, this is what we believe, when in fact the Bible teaches more and God has more in his mind than is actually contained in the systematic theology textbook. We have to go back to the Bible and not just be bound by our theologies. The institutions of our culture are driven by our shared values, and those shared values are driven by our shared beliefs. The systemic issues of our cultures are driven by our values, and our values are driven by our beliefs. So we need to take another look at that. But before we do, let me just talk about I'm using racism because it's such a prevalent issue. It's not the only systemic issue. But when you look at racism, this image here is the famous missionary William Carey. And Carey is considered to be the father of modern missions. He was a Baptist pastor in England. He challenged the lack of vision through his writing in the church, and he formed what became known later as the Baptist Missionary Society around 1800. In his challenge, he used this now famous phrase, expect great things from God, attempt great things for God. We hold up William Carey in mission-minded circles. We wouldn't be where we were today if he hadn't challenged the church the way he did. He was pretty influential in his challenge. He put his money where his mouth is. After forming the society, he became a missionary with the society, and he went off to Serampore, West Bengal, where he built Serampore College that still exists today. He served for the rest of his life as a missionary in West Bengal. We hold him up as the father of modern missions. There's another fellow that I didn't depict here, Adoniram Judson, who was the first American Baptist mission to go out as missionary just a little after Carey and went to Burma. But he was part of the group that formed the American Baptist mission, which almost all Baptist denominations in America find their foundation in Adoniram Judson, both Baptists. So very influential people, held up as heroes of the mission movement. But here's one you probably have not heard of as much, and this is George Liele. And I take this page from a new booklet that has just been released, kind of showing modern and older missionaries from the National African American Missions Council. But George Liele was considered the first known African American missionary. And he went out about 10 years before William Carey and 15 years, 20 years before Adoniram Judson. As soon as he got his freedom, he was freed by his master in 1778. And he then, partially for fear of his own life, he was afraid of being brought back into slavery again. But then he went to Jamaica, which is probably almost as dangerous. But he went to Jamaica. British were a bit more progressive than Americans at the time on the issue of slavery. And he began to plant churches, leading to more than 8,000 Baptist converts. So very effective missionary in Jamaica, well known in Jamaica, not well known in America, and yet probably one of the first documented missionaries from America. Why do we know William Carey and we don't know George Liele? That's systemic. It's because the knowledge base and the history base of our mission movement in North America has traditionally been Eurocentric and white-centric. It's not that we excluded non-white missionaries, it's just that we didn't include them. So they had to find their own way, and they created their own missionary societies. And today, the National African American Missions Council is one of those organizations trying to bridge the gap. They're an organization that promotes missions among African Americans, but they're also working with other missions to help reformat their structures to be more inclusive and more inviting to African Americans. And they would say their mission goes beyond just African Americans, it goes to all people of color. What we have to sometimes do in order to break down the unseen systemic issues that guide us that we're not even aware of, and that's a problem with systemic issues, they operate at a level of unconscious awareness. We don't pay attention to the systems that drive us. In order to break that down, we actually have to go deeper and understand the values and beliefs. Do we truly believe that all men are created equal? Do we truly believe that the gospel is for everyone? Do we truly believe that everyone can step up into leadership in our organization? Do we truly believe that racism is not the issue, that color of skin is not the issue? And therefore, do we truly value people who have different colors of skin than ourselves? And I'm speaking as a white, from a white perspective, who I understand that even in saying this, I am still a learner. I'm still trying to understand the issues that have shaped me by my culture throughout my lifetime that I was not aware of always, and trying to bring them to a level of awareness so I can make sure that my actions and my attitudes are pure and righteous before God and do not create more systemic racism or other systemic problems that keep me from including people and create the sense of inequality, which is actually an injustice. If we go back to this diagram here that we saw in a previous lesson, I put this up to show that a belief can shape many different values. A value can shape many different systemic structures. The systemic structures can all come together to shape an action. In our society, we most often act out of this systemic level on autopilot, following the norms of our society and not always challenging them, because that's just the way we do things. We act out of those norms without thinking. We need to start with this idea. All of our social structures are tainted by sin. Sin comes into the world at an individual level. It creates a systemic issue too. There's systemic sins because a society holds on to a belief and a system of values, a ranking of values, and a belief about those values that causes the structures to form out of which people act. And so sin goes to the roots, sin goes to the cultural beliefs and the worldview. Systemic issues are rarely solved by changes of behavior. This is why some approaches to racism have not been effective, because you can force people to change their behavior through affirmative action and things like that, but you're not changing their value system. If they still have a broken value system, they still will act according to that value system. If people still believe that people whose skin color is different than themselves, that they're inferior or unequal to them, they will value those people less, and they will continue to act according to that value because it will inform the systems they become a part of. Changing our behavior is not going to do it. What we need to do to change a systemic issue is to change the values and ultimately the perspective, the beliefs and the worldviews that shape those values. And when we do that, we begin to address inequality. I'm using racism as the backdrop of this because it's so prevalent and easy to see. But it's anything within a society. And as we're seeking to bring change, bring the gospel into a society, we have to break out of our systemic issues. And this is where contextualization comes in. Our theology and our church polity, our church action, our church organizations and structures don't always fit other cultures. Why? Because they're systemically created to support not only our religious beliefs, our beliefs in God, but they're also systemically created to support our other cultural values and beliefs. And that's why we have churches the way we do. When you go into another culture, and the church in another culture looks different than our church, because their church now is going to be trying to support the beliefs that they see in the Word of God, but they're also going to try to work with them within the system of their culture. And we have to always recognize that the church is a bit of a mix. David Bosch, in his Transforming Mission, said the church is a collection of the divine and the dusty. The church, wherever it exists, is both divine and dusty. It's touched by the world as well as touched by the gospel. We have to confront that in ourselves. We have to recognize that we, as Christians, are shaped not just by our belief in the Word of God, but we're shaped by the culture within which we receive the Word of God. And our churches are a mix of that. And so when we move to another culture, we want to see the church grow in that culture. And we don't want to see it reflecting our cultural values that may actually be broken and tainted by sin. So a very important concept. So, if you start with the worldview and you think about bringing justice into a system of inequality, then you begin looking at it this way. You start with our worldview. How do we perceive God? Well, here's what God says about himself. Therefore, the Lord wants to be gracious to you, and therefore he exalts himself to show mercy to you. For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him. That's a worldview issue. Do we believe that God is just? Do we believe that God is merciful? Do we believe that God is gracious? Do we believe that when we encounter any person in the world, no matter who they are and how different from us we perceive them to be, do we believe that God wants to be gracious to them? Do we believe he wants to exalt himself by showing them mercy? That's a foundational belief. We begin with that and then move to this next level of saying, what's the value that creates in us? The value is when justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous, but a terror to the evildoers. Is justice a joy to you? When you see justice done, does it bring you joy? When you see injustice done, does it bring you grief? That's at the value system level. Do you value justice? If you really value justice, then you will hate injustice and embrace justice and give greater importance to anything that is just. Then the next level up in the system structure, when justice is of value, it will roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. Do we allow justice to permeate our society? If we believe God is just and we believe his justice is a value that we should base our faith on and act out of, then the systems we create will be just systems. We should be challenging our systems to make sure they align with our values and aren't just an inherited system that we bring in from the past, but that we have a new system that demonstrates our values. And then at the next level up, of course, is the idea that results in us doing the things that are just. And of course, this verse that became very meaningful to us during the racial tensions of 2020, a lot of us held on to this verse and wanted to begin to act out of this and to say, he has told you, O man, what is good? What does the Lord require of you? But to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly before your God. How do you do justice? How do you love kindness and walk humbly with God? You do that by challenging the systems which promote injustice and bringing justice to bear on those systems. You do that by reinforcing in yourself and in others around you a value for justice. And you do that by believing that that is what God actually wants. What does God want for all communities in America today? He wants justice. And when justice really emerges, what justice looks like is the gospel breaking forth. Because when people come to understand that Jesus died to not only forgive them of their sins, but to break the power of injustice by allowing them to forgive those who unjustly treated them, that injustice has no power over their lives anymore. It's broken off because we understand that as much as I want to make sure that I'm justly treated, God knows when I've been unjustly treated, and God has brought justice to bear already on those people. They will face that, and if they don't bow the knee before Jesus, they will face the wrath of God for their injustice. But if they bow the knee before Jesus, if they come to follow Jesus, then they will receive the justice of Christ dying for their sins and the injustice that they've perpetrated. And so when I've been unjustly treated, when I've been treated as an unequal, I want to ask that the Lord would bring good to those who've treated me unjustly, that he would show them himself, and that as a result of that, they will come to know Jesus and receive the mercy of God for the injustice that they've done, as Jesus bears the full weight of that injustice on the cross. That's Christianity. That is who we are. And we need to make sure we're living like that. And as we go into the world, we want to look at the systems that are keeping people bound up and ask, how can we change those systems? It's not by changing their behavior. It's by changing what they believe. We need to show them Jesus. All right. God bless you. Have a great week.